Welcome to Hot Topics and this discussion on who is responsible for sustainability. So what a great group of people I have here. I guess the first question to all of you is, what is the CIO's role within sustainability? How do you see it, and how do you see your responsibility for making sure that people in the business are brought along that journey? Whoever wants to jump in, feel free.
I'll have a go. So I think first, we need as CIOs to make sure the IT department thinks about sustainability, thinks about its emissions, thinks about how it's contributing. But I think the other interesting thing is how we can help the rest of the business, because we own all the data. We can bring the business together, we can help the whole business measure how they're doing it and track.
Absolutely, yes.
I think, at OVO, our core mission is around sustainability, so decarbonising UK homes, and so we have a dual role, so we have exactly that, and I completely agree. We have to be always looking for better ways and making sure that the technology is as sustainable as possible, but also we're looking at how we can use technology to drive sustainable solutions in homes and helping customers understand what are the best things that they can do next to achieve that path to zero that we want them to go on. And so I think it's a dual role, both really important, and the visibility of how we are doing is really important, and the data, bringing that to life.
To what extent is it the responsibility of the CIO compared to other senior leadership? How do you see that split?
So within my company, I think because it's so core, it is a joint responsibility, and it has to be a joint responsibility because it's the reason for the company and it's what we talk about. And so we do have a head of sustainability, but their job is to make sure that we are tracking and measuring and making sure that we're doing the right things. But it's in everything that we do. So all parts of the organisation are looking at how they build in sustainability, and the biggest thing we can do really in terms of sustainability in our company is to make sure that our customers are taking the right steps.
Conor, what are your thoughts on this at Experian? It's all about the data, so you have a lot of data to look through. How do you use that in regards to being more sustainable?
I think there's many different dimensions to the data aspect. I think first and foremost is having the right telemetry to be able to look at what is your consumption across the technology estate. The technology estate is, in most organisations, is pretty vast. Everyone's got their own degree of legacy, I would say. So how do we bring that view back, not from how many applications have you got over what equipment is it on, that's the traditional way, but actually what is the power consumption, what is the manpower consumption, how does that translate to sustainability metrics, so we can actually educate the stakeholders. And I think education is a big part of the conversation, but bring facts back rather than just using I've got this legacy estate, I haven't got people to manage it. There are many different sides to that argument you need to bring to the table. And we're using a lot more now the sustainability data as to help that conversation and to encourage people to get onto more modern technology and build sustainable technology solutions. That's the key going forward. I think I see too many people just in the past focused on building the asset and forgetting about it, letting it run its own life. And unfortunately, you have to manage it in its life and try and keep the patient alive, as I call it.
And we use your data.
Thank you.
John, what's it like at the National Trust?
I think as the National Trust, we are Europe's largest conservation charity. So if we weren't thinking about all of this stuff really hard, then, we're doing something wrong. We're fortunate that we have a lot of real deep-seated experts in these areas. We have a lead for sustainability. However, in the organisation, everybody has got a significant part to play in both promoting sustainability, but also looking within their area and the wider ecosystem, their network, to see what we can do about it. I agree with everything that's been said already about what we can do with our own systems, with our own technology we consume, about the data that we can use to actually shine a light on some of this stuff. I think there's way more we can do as well, though. I think the use of technologies like IoT technologies, thinking about how we can ingest sensor data in a way that's smart, not just wasteful in its own right, but actually use that in a way that can actually promote the cause of sustainability. I think also there's a challenge that we think about. We tend to leap to certain elements of sustainability, which is normally around carbon consumption. Actually thinking a bit more broadly about it and what that means for whole organisations about how they do the business. I think there's another challenge that's technology leaders, though. There's a nettle we can grasp. I know we've got one of our wonderful colleagues from a manufacturing sort of technology here, but if we make choices that are based around sustainability on which technologies we use, there's a huge amount of power and leverage. So if we make that a core component about every acquisition that we make, then our partner organisations that are actually developing the technology have to take note. It doesn't then become a question about what are our own sustainability goals, what are the scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions of our organisation. It becomes a challenge for them about, well, how do we take market share because we offer the best, most sustainable solution that people want to consume.
And what's it going to take to change that? Because I don't think that is the way that it's being done.
So I think it's changing the question a little bit to say sustainability is everybody's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility who has a technology leadership role, and it's only through the great technology leaders and the future technology, because I can assure you those the Tech Girl community cohort we saw this morning, I can tell you they are interested in sustainability. And so future generations we have got a responsibility as technology leaders today to really lead for this and make people take note and listen.
And so much of the work you do as a CIO is unpacking it and explaining it. And I agree with you. I think it's our role to talk about the environmental impact of technology, and there's some difficult things there. So the great rush to go to the cloud, it has fantastic advantages, but we all know that the consumption of global data centers in terms of energy is very large. So it doesn't mean you don't go to the cloud, or the economic case is there, but you need to factor that in. You need to think about that, and then when people think of this as an infinite resource, actually make them aware. Well, it's not an infinite resource because it's on my budget, but more importantly, it's not an infinite resource you're consuming.
But we hear hyperscalers talking all the time about how cheap it is, how storage is so cheap. Well, it might be from a financial perspective, but the fact is if we are storing data that does not need to be stored, it's waste. And so we as technology leaders have got an educational role to play, say to people, in the same way that you wouldn't waste food, don't waste data.
Yeah.
Just because it's cheap to store doesn't mean that it's cheap from an environmental perspective to store it.
It's not good for the company, it's not good for the world,
It's back to that educational point, isn't it? Yeah. How do we become the educators around the organisation, and so we can raise the profile of sustainability? Because I always ask the question, the so what question. How do we join the dots up to make people really understand, to your point, this data is using X power, that power is actually, this is the impact to the environment. And I don't think we do a good enough job of closing that loop yet and explaining the real challenges that we're all facing.
Well, actually, that was going to be a follow-up question, because you talked about all the data and how powerful it is, but how much does exposing that data and showing the C-suite that data, how much does it actually lead to changing actions? It just feels like there's quite a long lag between that and actually things changing. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we, about how it feels quite slow. How do you see the CIO role at Cisco?
Well, I think I'm not the CIO of Cisco, but I think maybe at some point. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I think a lot of things resonate. What you said already. Sustainability in IT and by IT, right? Looking at that, we make our products more sustainable, manufacture them in a more sustainable way, but also deliver more use cases and more capabilities around applying technology to influence sustainable outcomes outside of that. Like, for example, using sensors in buildings. The buildings are a huge focus for us in general. Commercial buildings consume a lot of energy, also when no one's in the building, right? Really looking at, are there opportunities, when no one's in the building, no one's using the infrastructure to power down certain aspects. And in the past, I think this really hasn't been done because the easy way is to just have everything available at all times. then you don't need to think, when do I really need it? You don't need to implement policies, either time-based or event-based, to ramp up or ramp down capabilities. But I think the beauty is, what you said earlier, one person's scope 2 is another person's scope 3. So the energy, our devices consume on your premises is in our scope 3. So we have also an inherent interest and responsibility to reduce those as well. And that's by far the biggest part of our emissions are in scope 3. So the usage of our products, second, our supply chain.
But you don't need in a modern building somebody to have to switch the lights off to save the energy too. You should have smart control systems. There are smart control systems, and as you said, using IoT, Internet of Things. You can see it in commercial buildings, and it's coming in. The homes that we build. Using AI to control that. It's cost effective, and that's really, really important for everybody in terms of energy. It's also the right sustainable things to do. So I think, again, to your point about educating, we can be the bridges between what the technology can do and what the hardware that you're presuming do to produce the best results, for the planet and for the users.
And I think the technology has to make it easy for users, because I think that there's so many things and things move so quickly and people can't keep up. And actually what we need to do is for the technology to make it a lot easier and optimize on behalf of people. Like you don't want to get around switching all the lights off. And we shouldn't have to, but the technology has to.
How do you optimize? It's going to charge my electric vehicle, but this is commercial. Can it do it at the right time when it's...
So we've got a solution for that, Paul.
Thought you might have.
To me.
Yes.
I think we may have, is that Claire who's joining us virtually?
Yes, good morning. Well, good morning from me, good afternoon to you.
Hi Claire, welcome. So Claire, you work in the travel and hospitality solutions part of Amazon. What do you see as the CIO's role within sustainability in the business where you work?
First of all, I just wanted to pick up on that subject of technology being relevant, and I think you said easy, but also cost effective. So if you think of serverless technologies, without going into huge technical detail, they run when the code needs to run, and they don't when it doesn't. So let's just say you've got a website and someone's booking a trip to London, and it's a big global website and there's 100 users around the world, all happen to concurrently say, I'd like to do a search for flights to London. What happens is the code gets multiplied many times across the serverless technology. So you've effectively got 100 mini events happening at the time that you've got 100 concurrent users. 2 minutes later, you've got 2 users looking for flights to London, and all of that code gets shut down and you only have 2 mini processing environments running. So if you think about serverless technology, it's only AWS technology, I'm talking about Lambda. It scales when you need it and it scales down when you don't, and you only pay for when it's running. So it's a really good example of coming back to Paul's point about thinking about how you can design solutions that are cost effective. And perhaps that's where it starts for CIOs. I mean, one of the things that you talked about is the growth of data. And I was reading a report last week that said it estimates that 90% of data was collected in the last 2 years. So we're seeing phenomenal growth in data, and we have to be very cognizant of the cost of technology.
No, all great points. An observation, maybe 20 years ago, there were all these silos. There were the IT, which you talked about IT, you have the business people, and now obviously there's this big rush to do something about the problem that we have with sustainability. It now feels like these 3 skill sets are really being kind of merged together. So you guys as leaders in technology, you also have to be very cognizant about how to make the business grow as well as how to run a more sustainable business. Isn't this quite a big shift in your roles? It seems that all of these 3 aspects are becoming part of your roles. How are you dealing with that shift?
I'm not sure that came with sustainability. I think that shift happened with the shift to digital. where actually you just can't silo your organisation into this marketing and technology and maybe advertising and sales or whatever you have, because actually you're all trying to bring all those skills together and work together in a digital world. It's not segregated through the same channels. And so I think that started happening. And at that point, you saw the CIOs, CTOs, whatever name you choose to call yourself, you see the people who weren't good at having that business acumen kind of falling a little bit behind and becoming more sort of pure IT, and actually other people coming in with Chief Digital Officer and all these titles where actually there was a recognition that there was a new role. Yeah. The titles were ridiculous. Yeah. There was a recognition there's a new role, and I think actually people started then moving into that, and it's been gradually happening probably over the last 15 years or so.
Including the element of sustainability, because now you all have to think
Absolutely.
in a very sustainable way as well.
But it's all connected, because actually you can't do the sustainability without the data, and so you need to understand, you need to be data literate, and so it is all very interconnected. So sustainability is not a silo either.
It's not a silo, no.
But the big shift here is not the fact that anybody's roles change, the fact that business and everyone's knowledge of the need to be sustainable has changed. So the very fabric in which we operate is shifted. And so it doesn't matter, who it is that has to lead on that. It's part of everybody's role now, whether we're talking about, the carbon aspects of it, whether we're talking about, the equality aspects of it, or all of the different elements of sustainability. They are all part of what we do as organisations. And so we have to be knowledgeable in all of those areas because it's a core part of everybody's role.
And do you see in your businesses at a senior level, and perhaps at a more, a mid management level, that everyone has this awareness and is behaving in a certain way? Because it's fine to say it, but then what do people actually do to implement those kinds of initiatives? And therefore, that can also be a source of a problem, because you might think it here, but if it doesn't flow all the way down, then actually change isn't going to occur throughout the organisation. So I'm just curious that, do you think people see that responsibility for themselves at all levels, or is it much more at the top level because you know that you have to make these changes?
I think you see both. I think people are aware of those. They might not be able to name all of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, but what they will know if there is a particular area that they feel passionate about. I think that's really important, because what you need are individuals who will champion particular elements of it and promote those for colleagues to really learn about them. Because we're all sociable creatures, aren't we? And if one person has a particular passion about one element of sustainability, then they will really push that. And we can all benefit from that. We can learn from it. But I think the higher you go within an organisation, then you have to be aware of both the broad nature of all of the operations and the ambitions that your organisation has, but also then consider all of those elements of sustainability as well. But you don't necessarily have to be the ultimate expert in every single one of them.
I don't know how other people think about this, but I see a difference as well in the younger generations that are coming through the organisation. They have a much higher appreciation and a higher value to this topic than some of the older generations across the organisation. So I think that is definitely a really healthy pressure coming from bottom up, as well as obviously the top down. So I think most organisations will probably see this merging in the middle over time, but it's how can we accelerate that to make more people aware faster, so we can start making decisions right now.
I think you, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, I think you need to change the language as well. So for ages, we've tracked financial metrics, and then some companies start saying we're customer first, and you've maybe had CSAT or NPS and all these customer metrics, customer satisfaction metrics. And actually with sustainability, you need to have that tracking in that language, because then it can filter down. And so somebody, no matter where they work, at what level, can see how their work is connected to the outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
And then purpose does matter. I think it matters to all of us here, as you can see, but also if you're interviewing anybody or talking they will want to know what's the purpose of the organisation, and to some of your questions, are you serious about it? And actually, what is the dashboard that shows that we're going to have, net zero, homes by 2030 and a net zero company by 2040? Are we going to achieve that? So, as you say, I think it needs to run through the whole organisation. And I think one of the great things you said is that, sustainability is just one of those threads, because, organisations to work these days, have to be multi-threaded.
We have a concept in our organisation about being a good ancestor. So, we're fortunate, we've been around for 128 years. But when we think about what those ancestors were trying to achieve all that time ago, it was right in the very heat of the first industrial revolution, and what that meant for people and how they were engaging with nature, how they were engaging with the outdoors, and how we were losing huge swathes of our history. And when we think now, if you think of ourselves at this point in time, I think the reason, as you say, to younger generations why this matters is because we're the first generation that's actually experiencing this stuff now as a problem. We're seeing nature in crisis, the loss of biodiversity, we're seeing the impact of climate change. It's happening now.
And there's an urgency as well.
Exactly. The future generations, they are going to be the people living with the consequences of it if we don't take actions now. So if we choose at this point, are we going to be good ancestors or not?
And actually, to your point, Conor, you talked about the need to accelerate things. How do you accelerate things? Because I feel like there are lots of conversations like this, and I'm sure you all feel it as well. COVID was an accelerator. Obviously, we don't want to go back to COVID. How else can you accelerate things?
I think it's transparency of information, and how do we bring that to the forefront of the conversations that we're having with our stakeholders. Also, actions speak louder than words. So what actions are we taking that really demonstrates that we're making a difference? So we've recently gone through a cloud assessment, and one of our key criteria was, the supply chain conversation around what sustainability metrics, policies, practices do the partners have? And that was one of the key dimensions that we made our decision on.
And COVID obviously was a very big, thing that we all went through. But actually, this is as big. It's bigger. And so the urgency is there, and actually some of it has to be on the which actually the younger generation completely get. So the urgency is there, and people have to.
But they're not in those leadership positions making the decisions right now. They understand the urgency, but they're not pulling the triggers.
But bring them into the conversation. That's what we've started to do. Bring some of the younger generations into the conversation, so you can hear their view. It's so important.
I think what also helps is that I think in the past it was often seen as separate things to be successful in business and sustainable. And that massively, I think, slowed down the progress there. And I think, now the conversation shifts a little bit, because, I think we realize that being sustainable supports being successful on the business side as well, because you can be more efficient, you can diversify better, you can address other customers as well. They increasingly want to purchase sustainable products and live more sustainable. So I think this shift really helps them.
I can give a great example, initiative that Cisco undertook, which really resonated with me, which was they used to paint all the chassis of their switches and routers and everything, to go to great expense to make them look beautiful, to put them into a cabinet that nobody ever looked at them. Nobody. And yet they were using tons and tons of paint every year in order to do this. It's a completely pointless activity. So they then took that and said, looking at it from a sustainability perspective, let's flip this on its head. Let's stop doing that. Let's leave these aluminium chassis as they are. Let's sell them in their raw metal form, and let's tell customers the story as to why we're not painting them. And all of a sudden, you saw a shift in mindset. Say, well, actually, if I buy that product that's not painted, that's a great thing because it's more sustainable, isn't it? Yeah. And so sustainability is a unique selling point of companies' products and services.
Yeah, it is. Claire, sorry, I know you're virtual, but please feel free to jump in when you want. But what are your thoughts on how you can accelerate, this transition?
Yeah, thank you so much. Just going to mention two things that Amazon are doing, and they've partly been covered here, but it's sort of setting the agenda and getting everyone engaged. And that comes, I think, in hard goals, but in what I might call soft goals as well. So if I pick up on the soft goals first, I think we're a slightly unusual company. We have what we call leadership principles. They're sort of like values, but they're things that we do every day in everything we do, like a sort of corporate DNA. And one of those principles is success and scale bring broad responsibility. Now, if you look that up, what you'd find is we launched it in July 2021, recognizing that we're now a very big organization and we do impact the environment globally. And one of the things that leadership principle teaches us all at Amazon is that particularly resonates with me, is that leaders create more than they consume and always leave things better than how they found them. So that's a written down leadership principle for us. And something we would talk about that in our meetings every week, every day. A second aspect then is the hard goals. How do you set hard goals that people can say, in my role, what am I doing to contribute? And we have goals for being net zero by 2040. I believe most people know Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge. We're on a path to reach 100% renewable energy across AWS operations by 2025, and a number of other goals. So I think it's that balance to me between the sort of the hard and the soft goals and allowing it to be part of the conversation in everything that you do.
Yeah, and to a point I think you made, John, earlier, that it's not just about targets, it's about, which is also to your point, Claire, about hard and soft, it's about sustainability in a broader sense. So whether you're looking at supply chain or circularity, how much is that a part of your day-to-day conversations as tech leaders?
Huge. I mean, in everything, any product or service that we acquire, we add as much weight to the sustainability aspects of it now as we do to the ROI. And so in every business case investment, that's a really, up there in the considerations of what we do, along with the public benefit that we're delivering. And so, all of them, again, they're absolutely intertwined. I think only selecting products where people have really thought about things like the circularity of it. I mean, another great example, I'm not picking on Cisco here, but is why do we refresh an entire technology chassis every 5 years or so? Because that's what we've got used to. That's the way that things have happened. But actually now thinking, how can you do that at a modular level? How can you just look at chipsets? How can you stop this sort of cycle of activity that's actually pretty meaningless? Then that's how we can start thinking much more about giving longevity to some of these products and actually making them work for us in a much more sustainable way.
Yeah, it's definitely a focus area for us to focus on circular design, because the sustainability, to your point, of a product is defined to a large degree already in the design phase. So embedding more sustainable elements, modularity is one of them, into our products is definitely a goal we have and which we increasingly want to drive. There is, though, also the dimension that older devices sometimes tend to consume a lot more energy than newer devices do. That's where you then look at the energy efficiency, which can be, especially in like a data center and data center routing space, can be a lot better with newer products from an efficiency perspective. So then it could make sense actually to do this migration, but it's a differentiated view, right? I don't think it makes sense to look at every technology area the same way, and to have the same refresh cycles for every technology area, but you really need to look at where does it make sense and where does it maybe make sense to extend the cycle.
Do you find customers ask you about that? Do you think we ask you enough or push you hard enough on these things?
From my perspective, I would say you can never ask enough. So please keep going, ask more questions, because that really challenges us, and it shows how much you value this conversation and this topic. So definitely keep going with that. But I can definitely say the amount of questions and also the quality of questions increases and gets also better, gets more detailed. I think maybe 18 months ago, people weren't really sure maybe what to ask, which question do I need to ask, and I think that changed to a degree now, and the questions do get more detailed.
I think in a way there's a danger though that we push it to suppliers and make it your problem, whereas actually you know, there's nothing
it's a conversation, isn't
exactly.
it?
There's nothing as green as not doing something. So going back to data, you know, not holding the data is a lot greener than looking for the cheapest solution in terms of footprint to hold it. So I think we have to be careful that it's a partnership, and you're challenging us as well as partners, and making sure that we're also doing as much as we can, and we're not just pushing it out to other people.
But I think it's having that feedback loop, isn't it? Sharing the data so it can be fed back in, and we take note of it as well. Because for me, it starts with the architecture. What are we architecting for the future? Are we thinking beyond building the asset to the total cost of ownership and across the many different dimensions that covers? That's real sustainability, because you're thinking, because it's also the resource. We need sustainable resource. We need to have the skills that can continue for the future. And I'm constantly telling my team, you know, don't spread yourselves too thin across so many different technologies. Otherwise, that's when, you know, it'll get more expensive, which will impact then the environment with needing so many skills to support.
Yeah, so I'm curious, so when you as tech leaders have these conversations with partners and supply chain providers, are you very explicit about your expectations when it comes to sustainability, and how do those conversations go?
So from our perspective, we've built it into our procurement. So there are very specific requirements and criteria that we ask people to fill out.
So you won't even consider someone if they don't meet that criteria? It's as straightforward as that?
Yeah. I think that's been around for some time now. I don't think it's new.
Yeah. I think people are more stringent, and, you know, instead of it just being a question you ask, seeing what people come back with, they actually take genuine interest in the answers that come back and actually act upon them. So I do think it actually informs, and it's not, you know, it is in a broader sense as well. So we want to understand what, you know, how suppliers are approaching equality and diversity. That to us is as important as how they're approaching climate action. So it's really, it's having that totality of the offer. I know that's a lot harder for a lot of small, medium enterprises because they don't tend to have those corporate functions, but they can still think about them and they can still include them in any responses that they put.
The question, I think, for us is how much weighting to that dimension of your selection process, because you'll have a lot of different dimensions that we need to consider in selecting, and, you know, how much weighting do we give to sustainability? That's a really good challenge for all of us, and different organisations will have different pressures to make their decision.
We just have a few minutes left, and I just wondered if I could get some closing thoughts. I mean, we have talked about this, but just a thought from all of you on how do you then make sustainability everyone's responsibility? Well, easier said than done.
No, I mean, just picking up the points, and rather boringly, I think it's tracking it, you know, and just making sure that, you know, there is the awareness, you know, whether that's the discussion with the suppliers, you know, so it's, you know, it's out there, you know, whether it's, you know, people are investing in new systems, so, you know, we can supply the data so they can take informed decisions about it. So, you know, it's a bit dull and basic and a bit sort of, you know, what IT does, but actually I think we can help everybody by having a really factual conversation based on data.
So important, isn't it? Get the data, communicate, educate. And sessions like this is the first public conversation I've had with my peers on the topic. We've had lots of individual conversations, maybe one-on-one with vendors, but actually with peers. So great to raise the awareness. You know, thank you.
I think also allowing people the time. So in my tech team, I give them 2 days every quarter to just look at whatever green initiatives, we call it green days. So just go and look. Go and look, and whether it's doing hygiene or whatever, go and find better ways.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. John?
Yeah, we have a similar initiative, we call it our green team, that just get in there, find some problems, and let's work with our partners and try and fix them. But I'll quote Octavia Hill, who's one of our founders, who very eloquently, and far more eloquently than I, said, if not us, then who? And if not now, when?
That is so apt. That is so apt. Christian, what about
I'm not sure if I want to follow that quote now.
Sorry, maybe we should have ended it there. Yeah, you're going to have to talk about
No, that's all right. I'll give it my best shot. You know. No, I think, you know, I think bottom up and top down needs to happen at the same time. Call it ambassadors, a green team, but giving people, a forum to collaborate, to innovate, and to promote sustainability in the organization is important. But also like having it as an organizational priority. That it's not an afterthought. It's one of the main pillars. It just is. There's no alternative to it. And to quote our CEO, if I hope I get the quote now right, but making business equitably and sustainably is the only way we can do business. And I think I want to close with that.
Well, I think that's a very good closing. I think John's quote still wins over you. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, all of you. What a great conversation. Thank you. And thank you to you, Claire, for joining virtually.